And today was the first day of a BC coroner's inquest into the death of Florence Girard. Florence, who had Down syndrome, was receiving government-funded care in a home share when she died in 2018. She was 54 years old and weighed only 50 pounds. The Port Coquitlam home where she lived belonged to Astrid Dahl, who was later convicted of failing to provide the necessities of life to Girard. Now, a jury at the coroner's inquest will look into the circumstances of Florence's death and make recommendations to prevent similar situations. We are joined now with two witnesses speaking at the inquest. Sharon Bursey is Florence's sister. Hi, Sharon.
Hi.
And Tamara Taggart is the president of Down Syndrome BC. Hi, Tamara.
Hi.
So, Sharon, tell us about your sister, Florence. What was she like?
She was a smart aleck. She liked to joke a lot and tease people. She liked to hit on my husband. Yeah. And she loved everybody. If she had met you, first thing would be asking you if she could give you a hug. And she loved boys. She was boy crazy. She was great. She swam in the Special Olympics.
Yeah.
And she was great because I'm not a good swimmer, so I really admired her swimming in there. It was great to go and watch. And she just grew up with my kids grew up with her, and she'd spend all the holidays with me at my house, where she'd get waited on like she was royalty, of course. And whatever I wanted her to do, she would do until she didn't want to, and then she would remind me that she was older than me.
The older sisters,
Yeah.
and they're all the same.
And then she didn't have to do what I told her to do. So that wouldn't last long. She would end up, I could talk her into almost anything. So, yeah, she was just funny. She loved people. She loved just being around people and being a center of attention.
But it sounds just, full of life.
Absolutely.
But also having a very full life.
She did.
Were there any indications that she was being mistreated in the home?
Not that I seen until I was starting to not be able to get a hold of Astrid. She would not return any calls. She would say she would, then she wouldn't. And when I started hearing, I'd phoned Kinsight to try and get a hold of Astrid. That was the only way that I could, just to have Florence come stay at my house.
Right.
So it was pretty difficult to get Florence out of that house with Astrid. She wouldn't answer. So, but...
And you would have liked to have had Florence
I wanted
with
Florence to live with me.
But you weren't able
beginning.
to financially.
No.
And were you not able to access any government
At
funding?
the time, CLBC told me that they wouldn't fund family. So that's how she ended up being with Astrid, because Astrid had worked with Florence for many years in the group home. And so I had developed a relationship with Astrid myself, and her and Florence had such a sarcastic attitude with each other, but all in fun and love, and they loved each other. I could tell, you knew it, and home was with Astrid. Florence would always call home, right? And
so there was a lot of trust that you placed in Astrid.
That's since she couldn't come and live with me, that was to me the next best option. Until it wasn't.
And I know that's probably upsetting to talk about, but what do you know about the conditions that Florence was living in at the time of her death?
Well, I've seen the pictures of that the police took of her deceased in her bed, which is horrific. I mean, she was on a mattress on the floor with dressers blocking her window so she couldn't even look outside, a baby gate at the door so she couldn't go out of the room.
And how did it get to a point where you felt she was going with somebody that displayed love for your sister, that you felt you could trust? How do you think it got to this point?
I think about 4 years in or so, her common law husband and her had split up very tumultuous situation, and I think she just lost her capability of caring for anyone else at the time. I think she lost the ability to care for herself. And it was downhill from there.
Right.
And once they separated and she moved, I wasn't even told that she had moved. So I had no idea of what was going on.
What do you worry about happening to other people that are in this situation? Do you think this could still happen?
I'm confident that it will happen. Nobody laid eyes on my sister for 8 months, even though they had been across the hall from her a month before she died. They did not knock on her door to say hello or anything. So, I mean, if she hadn't gone to a doctor in 4 years or a dentist in 5 years, there was nobody monitoring her.
Right.
Nobody monitoring Astrid. So I think just the last 4 years, Astrid's life went in the toilet, and she took Florence with her.
Tamara, your organization was formed in the wake of Florence's death. Why was there this impetus to just come together?
Yeah, well, after Florence died, there was an RCMP news conference. I saw it on TV just like everybody else, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And of course, my son, Beckett, is 17 now, and he has Down syndrome, and a big part of my friend group also have children with Down syndrome. I know a lot of adults with Down syndrome and disabilities, and I saw my son, and I saw his friends, and I worried about my child's future and everybody's future. And having worked in news for so long, I had seen and reported on many stories.
Yeah.
I'd never heard of someone starving to death.
No.
Ever. And, it doesn't happen in Canada.
Well, and I think that was it. Like, the death was shocking twofold. It was that this happened to somebody with Down syndrome, but the reasoning behind that death was shocking.
And I think, my son was young at the time, right, in 2018, and he still is, he's 17, but I knew what a struggle I was having, and I'm pretty good at advocating for myself, my kids, my friends, anybody who wants help. I'm pretty good at it. And I was having trouble just with my own child in school.
Yeah.
And, people, I noticed that the older he got, the more he was discriminated against. But I also noticed that the people working with him also were. So, support workers in school for, and I've been advocating for the well-being of support workers in schools for a long time in this province, because we have to, every year, we worry about whether our kid is going to have support in school or not. And we have to, advocate for it and give all the reasons why.
Justify it.
Right? We have to justify why our child needs extra help. And it's never a guarantee. And sometimes there's a wait list for this, and there's, a wait list for that. Or people will just, push you to the side and say, well, it's just Down syndrome. Like, that's just the way it is. And the other thing is that people with Down syndrome in this province do not receive any type of funding. And so a lot of people don't know that. So when I watched the news conference about Florence, I sent out an email or a note on Facebook with the story, and I said, this has to stop. This can never happen again. If you want to join me in fighting, send me your email. And before I knew it, I had 200 emails, and I thought, now what? Because, I'm a talker, not a typer, and talked to a couple of other parent friends, and they were like, okay, let's do something. And I had a Zoom with like 100 people, and it was just story after story after story after story of parents with small children with Down syndrome and adults with Down syndrome. And then before I knew it, we found one of our really organized parent friends, and she started really organizing us, and we formed a society. We're a nonprofit. We don't receive any government funding, and our sole purpose is to advocate for basic human rights in British Columbia.
In
For
2025.
people, yes, for people with Down syndrome. So what happened to Florence never happens again to anybody.
You speak about advocating for Beckett, and you've advocated for Florence, and I can't imagine the weight of that and how tiring it must be to continually have to fight to protect somebody that you love so much, and how for so many people it must be discouraging. It must be hard to continue that fight. So what do we need to do to help people so they don't have to fight it alone, so that you're not the only one advocating for your sister or for your own child? What are we getting wrong that this is still happening?
Well, that's a really good question, and we'd probably need a 3-hour show to talk about it. But I think, what it comes down to is transparency. Understanding, basic empathy. And, Beckett goes to a high school in Vancouver. And I say this as often as I can. And I know people in certain, positions of power don't like it when I say this, but he's in a segregated classroom in a high school in Vancouver. And he's been in the same classroom with the same students and the same teacher for his entire high school experience. He thrived in elementary school. He was in the classroom with all his friends, and he thrived. He was included in everything. It changes in high school.
Yeah.
And then it changes again when he turns 19. And then he goes into, under the umbrella of Community Living BC.
Yeah.
And that's what, this inquest is about, right? It's about the levels that are responsible. We have the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction, which is responsible for Community Living BC, which gets well over $1 billion every year. They then give money out to local agencies like Kinsight or whatever they might be, and they have group homes or home shares. And, my son might end up in a home share or a group home. I don't know. One of us sitting at this table might one day. We don't know, right? That's the reality.
Yeah.
And there needs to be transparency and proper funding, and there needs to be a forensic understanding of, what happens when somebody is abused in care. How many people die in care? We don't know, because it's all about privacy, right? Yeah. And so there's so many questions. It's really, you're right, it's exhausting. I can't even begin to explain how exhausting it is. Every parent I know is, we have to, sometimes we have to downplay our children so that we get the support we need. And that goes against everything we know as being a parent, because we want to celebrate our kids.
Right.
They tied their shoes today,
them.
Right? Yeah. But maybe you have to say they can't tie their shoes just so you get some support. So there's a lot of work to be done, but we can start with transparency.
And just before I let you go, Sharon, you were the first speaker at today's inquest. What are you hoping the jury takes away from your testimony?
That Florence mattered.
She did.
And she was loved, and she loved a lot too. She was very sweet. I just don't want this to ever happen again to another family. Nobody should ever suffer. Starvation must hurt. I mean, if you get hangry from being hungry, what is it like to be starved? It doesn't happen overnight.
No.
I just never want to see that again. I don't want any other family to go through it, but I'm confident it will happen again.
I thank you both for coming in. And Sharon, thank you so much for sharing your sister with us and for fighting so hard for her.
Thank you.
And thank you, Tamara.
Thanks.
Sharon Bursey is Florence's sister, and Tamara Taggart is the president of Down Syndrome BC. The inquest into Florence Girard's death is expected to go into next week. Afterwards, a jury will make recommendations.